The studio lights gleamed brighter than usual as Gwen Stefani took her seat across from Jimmy Fallon, her trademark smile sharp but controlled. The audience cheered, sensing electricity in the air, the kind that comes when two big personalities share a couch with unresolved tension humming beneath the surface. Gwen adjusted the microphone clipped to her jacket, her fingers lingering a second too long, while Jimmy shuffled his cue cards with a grin that looked effortless, but only at first glance. Jimmy opened with easy applause lines, praising Gwen's decades-long career, her influence on pop culture, her fearless reinventions. Gwen nodded politely, thanked him, and flashed a smile that was camera-ready but guarded. From the control booth, producers watched closely, already aware that this interview might not follow the usual playful rhythm. Gwen wasn't just another guest tonight. She had opinions, and she wasn't in the mood to dilute them. Things stayed smooth for the first few minutes. They joked about old tour memories, fashion risks from the early 2000s, and the surreal experience of hearing her songs play in grocery stores. The audience laughed on cue, and for a moment it felt like a typical Tonight Show segment, light, nostalgic, safe. But Jimmy, leaning into his role as the charming instigator, pivoted toward a recent headline. "So," he said casually, tapping his cards, "you've been pretty open lately about frustrations in the industry. Some people say it sounded like you were calling out a few late-night hosts too." The laughter softened into murmurs. Gwen's smile froze, then slowly faded. "I didn't name anyone," she replied evenly. "But if someone feels called out, maybe that says more than they want to admit." Jimmy chuckled, trying to steer it back to humor. "Fair enough, I just thought maybe you'd turn it into a joke." Gwen cut in, her tone calm but firm. "That's usually how this goes." A ripple passed through the audience. Jimmy raised his eyebrows, still smiling, but there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "I mean, this is a comedy show," he said lightly. "And I'm not a punchline," Gwen replied without missing a beat. The band fell silent. The laughter stopped completely. Jimmy shifted in his seat. "No one's saying you are. I just think people like seeing the fun side." "The fun side is easy," Gwen interrupted again, this time leaning forward. "What's harder is letting artists talk honestly without packaging it into something safe." The tension thickened, almost visible. Cameras subtly adjusted angles, cutting to Gwen's focused expression, then back to Jimmy's increasingly careful demeanor. Somewhere backstage, a producer whispered urgently into a headset. Jimmy tried to regain control. "Okay, but honesty can still be fun. You've always balanced that really well." Gwen exhaled, a sharp breath she didn't bother hiding. "With respect, Jimmy, balance only works when both sides are actually listening." That landed hard. Jimmy laughed nervously, glancing toward the audience. "I am listening." "Then listen to this," Gwen said. "Women in this industry get celebrated for being iconic, right up until they stop being convenient. Then suddenly we're difficult, or too intense, for a light-hearted conversation." The audience erupted, not in laughter, but applause. Jimmy's smile tightened. "I don't think anyone here thinks that. Do you?" Gwen asked, locking eyes with him. The question hung in the air. Jimmy hesitated, a beat too long for live television. "I think," he said carefully, "that sometimes interviews work better when we keep things comfortable." Gwen finished. "Comfortable for who?" Now the applause was louder, scattered with cheers. The band remained silent, waiting for a cue that didn't come. Jimmy's desk felt farther away than usual, like a shield he hadn't bothered to sit behind. Jimmy cleared his throat. "Look, I don't want this to feel adversarial." "Then stop framing it that way," Gwen replied. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried weight. "I came here to talk about my work, my choices, and yes, my frustrations. Not to have them softened into a punchline." The studio felt smaller, tighter. Producers exchanged looks. This wasn't playful tension anymore, it was a standoff. Jimmy attempted one last pivot. "All right, let's talk about the album then." Gwen tilted her head, studying him. That would have been a great place to start. A few audience members gasped. Others clapped again, louder this time. Jimmy forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. "Okay," he said, "new chapter." But Gwen leaned back, crossing her arms. "I don't think we're there yet." Jimmy blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Gwen said slowly, "this conversation already showed exactly what I was talking about." The applause swelled, then fractured into nervous laughter as Jimmy raised his hands, signaling for calm. Hey, let's not get too serious here." Gwen smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. Too late. The director's voice crackled through headsets. The cameras kept rolling, but the usual rhythm of late-night television had completely unraveled. Jimmy glanced off stage, then back at Gwen. "So, are we good?" he asked. Gwen held his gaze. "That depends on whether you actually want to have this conversation, or if you'd rather cut to commercial." Silence. The red recording light blinked steadily, capturing every second. The audience waited, breath held, as the tension reached a breaking point. Jimmy glanced once more toward the producer's table, then back at Gwen. The silence stretched so long it felt deliberate, like a test of wills unfolding in real time. The red light stayed on. No music cue came. No commercial break swooped in to rescue the moment. The Tonight Show had slipped into uncharted territory. "Let's talk," Jimmy finally said, lowering his voice. "Really talk?" Gwen nodded once, then dropped the cards. He hesitated, then set the cue cards down on the desk. A small gesture, but the audience noticed. A few people clapped softly, unsure whether they were witnessing a breakthrough or the calm before a storm. "You've been doing this a long time," Jimmy said. "You know how live TV works. And you know how often that's used as an excuse," Gwen replied. "Live TV doesn't mean shallow TV." The words landed with a dull thud. Jimmy leaned back, rubbing his palms together. "I'm not trying to silence you. But you are trying to steer me," Gwen said. "Every time I start saying something uncomfortable, you pivot." "That's my job," Jimmy said quickly, then stopped himself. "I mean, sometimes." Gwen raised an eyebrow. "Exactly." The audience murmured. The band members shifted in their seats, hands hovering over instruments they hadn't touched in minutes. Jimmy straightened. "All right, say it. What do you think late night gets wrong?" Gwen took a breath, deep and steady. "We invite artists on to promote work, but the moment that work is tied to something real, age, power, control, we rush to smooth it over. Especially with women who aren't new, shiny, or easy to brand." Jimmy nodded slowly, but his jaw tightened. "I don't think that's intentional." "Impact doesn't need intention," Gwen replied. "It just needs repetition." The applause this time was loud and unified. Jimmy waited for it to die down, but it lingered longer than usual. "You're putting me on trial here," he said, attempting a half smile. "No," Gwen said, "I'm putting the format on trial." Jimmy laughed once, sharply. "This format built a lot of careers. In boxed. In just as many," Gwen shot back. "Including mine, at times." That was the moment the mood shifted completely. Jimmy leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "So why come here?" Gwen didn't hesitate. "Because I believed tonight might be different." A hush fell over the room. Jimmy opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence felt heavier now, less dramatic and more uncomfortable. "Gwen," he said carefully, "this is starting to feel less like an interview and more like a confrontation." "Only because you weren't prepared for honesty," she replied. The band leader glanced off stage. A stage manager made a subtle cutting motion across his neck, signaling the need to rap. Jimmy noticed. Gwen did too. Jimmy exhaled. "We're running long. Funny how that only matters when things get real," Gwen said. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the audience. Jimmy's smile faded. "Okay," he said, voice firmer now. "I think we've reached a point where this isn't productive." Gwen tilted her head. "For who?" "For the show," Jimmy replied. "And there it is," Gwen said softly. Jimmy straightened, slipping back into host mode. "I want to thank you for being here tonight." Gwen looked around the studio, the lights, the audience, the cameras still rolling. "Are you thanking me?" she asked, "or dismissing me?" The question cut through the room like a blade. Jimmy hesitated, then stood up slightly from his chair. "We're going to take a break," he said, forcing a smile. "When we come back, I won't be here," Gwen said calmly. Gasps echoed through the studio. Jimmy froze. "What?" he asked. Gwen rose to her feet, unclipping the microphone with deliberate slowness. "You invited me to speak. The moment I did, it became inconvenient. I won't perform gratitude for that." A producer's voice shouted off stage, barely contained. Jimmy stepped closer to Gwen, lowering his voice. "You're putting us in a tough spot." Gwen met his eyes. "Imagine how artists feel every night." The audience stood, applause exploding through the room. Some people cheered, others watched in stunned silence. The cameras scrambled, unsure whether to follow Gwen or stay on Jimmy. Jimmy tried one last time. "Gwen, let's not do this like this." She paused, hand resting on the edge of the stage. "Then don't keep doing it the same way." She walked off. The band didn't play her out. There was no music sting, no joke to soften the exit. Just the sound of clapping and the echo of her heels disappearing backstage. Jimmy stood alone under the lights. For a long second, he said nothing. Well, he finally muttered, forcing a laugh that didn't convince anyone, that was unexpected. The cameras cut to commercial. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. Headlines wrote themselves. Some praised Gwen for her honesty, calling it long overdue. Others accused her of hijacking the show, of turning a late-night interview into a lecture. The Tonight Show trended worldwide, not for a sketch or a game, but for a moment no one could edit away. Backstage, Gwen didn't rush. She thanked crew members who looked at her with a mix of admiration and disbelief. One assistant whispered, "I've never seen that happen." Gwen smiled faintly. That's the point. Jimmy, meanwhile, sat alone in his dressing room, tie loosened, staring at his phone as notifications poured in. Producers knocked, talking fast, damage control already underway. He nodded, but his attention drifted back to the empty couch on stage. For the first time that night, there was no joke to lean on. The next morning, analysts debated who was right and who crossed the line. But the clip kept playing, and one thing was undeniable, the conversation Gwen demanded had escaped the studio. It was out there now, raw and unresolved. And long after the applause faded, the silence she left behind spoke the loudest of all.